All right, welcome back, Good Shepherd. I want to cover today the self-sufficiency of God. Now, this is closely related to the self-existence, but that could be said of all the attributes. They're all closely related. They're all woven together like fabric. And so, when you think about self-existence, which is what we just covered a couple days ago, self-sufficiency really weaves together closely with this because God is existing within himself and has always existed. And so then it draws us to the conclusion as well that he is not relying on anything outside of himself for that existence. So let me give a definition of the self-sufficiency or independence, as it were, of God. The self-sufficiency of God means that God is not at any level dependent upon anyone or anything other than himself. He has total independence. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I want to just ask the question, why? Why did he do that? And now some will suggest that the self-existent one was sitting in eternity past and saying, boy, you know, I'm a little lonely. I feel like I need to create somebody, some people to be my friends and to hang out with. And I mean, really, it sounds so silly to say, but actually, there are Sunday school teachers who have said things like this, and how blasphemous it is when you really stop and think about it. The idea that God would need or be lacking in himself in any way, that is not consistent with his self-existence or self-sufficiency, especially when you consider the Godhead, right? The Father, the Son, and the Spirit, equal in unity and in essence, and then distinct in personhood, as we studied in the Trinity, existing in perfect communion and fellowship from eternity past. There's no need, there's no lack there, right? So God is sufficient in himself. Here are a few things to think about. God does not need us. He doesn't need us. He didn't create us to fill some void or lack that he had. Listen to how J.I. Packer says it this way. God has life in himself and draws his unending energy from himself. Now, here's something that all of us do, at least should do, and if we don't, we are in trouble. We go to sleep at the end of a day. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us that we wear out. We are exhausted. And as we sleep, God is renewing our strength. We have a limited capacity within ourselves. And God knows that. He wired us up with weakness and needs to show us our dependence upon him. When we sleep, we are saying, in a sense, I'm not God. I'm not God. God never sleeps or slumbers. He never wears out or grows weary. He doesn't tire. He is a God who has infinite strength, and he draws from within himself all that he needs. He is never, ever winded, as it were. He is never at a loss. He never even has to stop and think. He is infinite in his power, and all of his resources he has, infinitely so within himself. He is self-sufficient. Everything other than God depends upon God, but God depends upon nothing besides himself. Sometimes our view of God is just so low, and I find this over and over as I study theology. It is the great corrector of low thoughts of God. God's word constantly drives our thoughts of him higher. And conversely, God's word constantly drives our high thoughts of ourselves lower. This is the great reversal as you study theology. True biblical teaching will always elevate the God who is, the self-existent, self-sufficient, glorious God of the Bible, and remind us that we, my friends, we are dependent upon him. Totally. For everything. I want you to just take a deep breath right now. Ready? That breath was a gift. Just stop and listen to your heartbeat. You can't feel your pulse. Every beat is the work of God. It's not random. It's not just coincidence. It's not just happening because he wound it up and walked away. No, that heart beats at the work of God. And it is sustained to do so by the word of his power. That is the dependency that we have. So often we just fail to remember these things. Man is created, a created being, a derived and contingent self who himself possesses nothing, but is dependent each moment for his existence upon the one who created him after his own likeness. Listen to Acts 17. This is a spectacular passage. Acts 17. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and, notice, breath and everything. It all comes from him, the self-existent, self-sufficient one. It goes on to say, he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth. So we conclude here the New Testament affirming the Old Testament, Genesis 1 and 2, very much affirmed in those verses, having determined allotted periods and boundaries of their dwelling place. So we have a God who is self-existent and self-sufficient. Those are two things we could never say, ever. The epitome of sin, however, is that we try to convince ourselves that that is somehow the case. That somehow we can be our own gods, our own sovereign, and we can live free and be the Lord of our own lives and rebel against the God who is. Oh, friends, it goes back to the garden, right? The day you eat of that fruit, you will be like God. You can be your own God. That lie continues to this day, and it drives so many people the wrong way, away from God rather than to him, to be depending upon him, to trust him, to rely upon him. So, as you dig through these questions and read these verses, rejoice in the God who is sufficient, not only in himself, but sufficient for all that we need when we come to him in faith, in adoration, in worship. All right, enjoy the study. Keep up the good work. We'll check in with you here soon with another attribute. Go in peace.